What if we, as a society, have rolled out some major pieces to a puzzle that most don't even realize requires piecing together at all, because most everyone was never willing to go there for answers? Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Okay, so I'm going to go a different route with this post compared to the previous ones if you've been following me. I thought we could play the game What If? Are you game? Okay, to give you a little background on me, which is relevant, trust me, it will all make sense if you allow the water to come to a boil without watching it, so to speak. So as a 20-year professional in the computer support field, I, as other IT professionals, will attest that one of the first things we'll learn is never, and I repeat never, rule anything out as the possible problem. Now, cutting to the point, the reason you don't want to rule anything out as a potential problem is because you could be spinning your wheels, left scratching your head, which invariably will lead you back to the old drawing board, as in starting from the beginning. And you just wasted a lot of time when you ultimately ended up where you should have been in the first place. Okay, so where I'm going with this is, what if we, as a society, have rolled out some major pieces to a puzzle that most don't even realize requires piecing together at all, because most everyone was never willing to go there for answers. So it was immediately dismissed as a reason for why what is going on today is going on the way it is. Now, if you're nowhere near awake, you may not even know what I'm referring to. So just know that I'm going into this with the belief that most everyone who has seen my previous videos is either awake or on the road to being there. I mean, clicking on the play button is a great start, showing you really want to learn because you're concluding that things are pretty messed up out there, right? Okay. Anyway, most people, especially the bride, as in the church, if you're not familiar with that term, wholeheartedly believes that the Bible is infallible, that every word within the word is truth and nothing but. Well, what if, and now the game begins, what if I told you that that wasn't true, that it's not only not true, but a major reason for society being the way it is now? Now, before I go on, let me just clarify something, okay? Now, if you can discern what within the Bible is fact and what is fiction, and trust me, there's a lot of fiction, as in false teachings, especially in the New Testament. But if you can discern, the Bible is still infallible. I know that might sound weird to hear, but trust me, if you can discern fact from fiction, the Bible is still infallible, because Father Yahuah always knows the end from the beginning, as Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 through 13 explains. You see, once your awakening has started, you quickly realize that there is no such thing as a coincidence. Okay, so let me ask you this. With all the pedophiles being arrested in the last couple of years, and the 70,000 some odd alleged indictments on the docket just begging to be unsealed, allegedly, haven't seen anything, so why should we believe it? Why would anyone think anything would be off limits when it comes to preserving the sanctity of anything, including Father's Word, especially Father's Word? I mean, do people really believe that child trafficking evildoers who are raping and sacrificing our children to Lucifer all over the world have morals when it comes to tampering with the Bible? Now, allow me to let you in on a big secret, which has been kept from the masses for thousands, yes, thousands of years. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. They do not have any morals or ethics. Everything is fair game to them. Everything. And Father Yahuah allows for it to happen for his ultimate purpose, because he creates dark, light, good, and evil, as stated in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. Now, did anyone know that the Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19 warning only pertains to that specific book and not the entire Bible, like Lucifer's minions would most likely prefer you to believe? It was added later. It wouldn't at all surprise me if that was included in the translator's edition when the KJV, King James Version, was introduced in 1611. Now think about it. People are led to believe every word in the Bible is truth. And I know for a fact that that's not true. So they hold on to it for everything they're worth. Now, if someone like me knows it's not true, but I'm able to discern what is and what isn't, for the most part anyway, because I've been willing to put pride and ego aside by admitting I, like everyone else in the world, have been badly deceived, sits at Father's feet, childlike, to have him reveal all truths to me. So what does that say about the people who changed it? And I know they changed it. They clearly were not scared off by that warning, which brings me to the game. What if we are only getting half the story of what really happened in the Garden of Eden? That is exactly how far back we'd have to go in order to figure out what is going on today, 6,000 or so years later. I mean, wouldn't that change everything? Wouldn't that make it a whole new ballgame? Now, before we go there, what if every government position was predetermined through a secret monopoly? What if what really happened in Eden reflects what is going on in Congress and politics in general, and has for a very long time? What if, after the Son of Man had risen and left for good just less than 2 months later, somebody was waiting in the wings to destroy everything that Yahuah had built in the way of his ministry called the Way? What if this same man first tried persecuting Yahuah's followers, ultimately realizing that this wasn't getting him where he needed to go? So he took another route by infiltrating the Way and ultimately starting his own version of Christianity by hijacking the original version, even though it was never called Christianity. And he made a hybrid of Christianity and Mithraism, which is still dominating the bride today. What if most everything ties back to Eden? Only most people don't know it because we have never been given a reason to believe that the truth was hidden through malicious lies, especially when ministers give us no reason to consider we're missing major pieces to the puzzle. What if they are not focusing on that possibility because of who really runs seminary schools? And they control the narrative by teaching specific parts of the Bible while ignoring other crucial parts like the Torah, as in the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, okay, before I go on and potentially lose you completely during an eye roll, trust me, I know how this sounds. Like an unrealistic movie script, much less than real life, right? But what if I told you that that reason alone is exactly what the dark side has relied on for all these years in order to be where they are today? What if they've always known if anyone tried to bring this to the surface, like Sherry Shriner, that that person would be mocked and ridiculed for believing such preposterous theories, much less sharing them with others, as I'm doing now? What if this group kept close tabs on people like her, but especially her, because they knew she spoke the truth, even if the majority didn't? So they had to find out how much she knew to try and stop her any way possible, just in case people, like me, started awakening. What if I lose subscribers for posting this video because I'm now considered crazy? But I knew that was a possibility, but it's too important not to divulge, so I'm willing to do it anyway. Okay, where was I? What if ministers preach primarily out of the New Testament for a specific reason, because of how they were specifically instructed in seminary school? What if the Old Testament holds more truths than we have ever known, but a big lie is keeping preachers from investigating it? What if the church's main purpose is to conceal information from the public because they know most people won't bother researching it on their own? What if the church, who focuses mostly on the New Testament, has the bride unknowingly worshiping the guy who wrote half the New Testament? What if the Father and Son's names were maliciously removed from the good book in order to create deception and the ultimate mind control ever concocted? What if Abraham Lincoln wasn't such an honest ape? What if behind the scenes, the Civil War wasn't a fight to free the slaves, but rather to enslave all citizens in America when it was all said and done? What if 6 years after the war had ended, as in the Civil War, the deep state pulled one of the biggest scams on the country possible, all related to what really transpired in Eden, but was kept a secret? What if war and extended military engagements, which is what war is called when it's not officially declared by Congress, which hasn't happened since the World War II, is always started through false flags so the deep state can fund both sides, not caring who wins, as long as death is widespread? Agenda 21, Operation Depopulation, ever heard of it? Because they get rich regardless, not to mention both sides are debt slaves to them indefinitely. What if the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote, is a perfect example of fixed voting, because the real reason women were allowed to vote is because the shadow government wanted to be able to tax the other half of the population. Not to mention, kids would start in public schools earlier to become indoctrinated by the mind control school system. What if not only politicians are controlled through a monopoly, but so is SCOTUS, as in the Supreme Court of the United States, and judges on lower levels? What if you had to be a Satanist to even be considered for a position in politics and ultimately SCOTUS and other appointed positions, since Congress has the vote that holds the candidate's future in their hands? Again, all because of what really occurred in Eden. What if Justice Anton Scalia was specifically appointed by Ronald Reagan in the mid-80s in order to run interference to ensure child traffickers wouldn't have any obstacles in their way? What if every law student to pass the bar, which stands for the British Accreditation Registry, since 1939 had to sign a secret bankruptcy oath, which was related to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, to make U.S. citizens U.S. corporation debt slaves indefinitely through illegal federal taxes? But generation after generation doesn't know any different because of generational indoctrination. What if the sinking of the Titanic was actually a false flag produced by the deep state due to who they knew would be on board, as in the primary people of power who were trying to stop the Federal Reserve from becoming a reality? What if the Titanic wasn't even the Titanic, but rather another ship called the Olympic, which was decked out in Titanic garb to look like the Titanic? What if they were able to kill those 3 men on board, and the following year, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was secretly passed during the Christmas holiday when they knew most of Congress wouldn't be around to dispute it? What if the Federal Reserve was specifically named that to convince the masses that it was a government-run agency instead of a foreign-run agency? What if the signature line on your checks wasn't actually a solid line, but rather microscopic words that we are not supposed to detect in order for us to blindly sign our checks? What if our birth certificates were actually our death certificates, because the day we are born, we are killed off in the eyes of the government, and our corporation takes over, and that's why our name is always in capital letters on any contract we sign: credit card, marriage license, driver's license, gravestone, you name it, all capital letters known as glossa. What if the real reason we're told to hire an attorney to represent us in court is so they can run interference because they are in cahoots with the judges, since they too are still sworn to secrecy via the secret bankruptcy oath? What if the old adage, anyone who represents themselves in court has a fool for a client, is using reverse psychology because they don't really want us representing ourselves? For we may learn the truth because we wouldn't automatically hand the reins over to someone involved in the corrupt system. Unknowingly hand over the reins. What if there's a completely different reason our flag has 50 stars, and the number of states is just a convenient excuse? What if there's a reason we stopped at 50 states specifically, and the powers that be knew the entire time that we would never have another one for the next 59 years, or ever again, because of their ultimate plan? What if the gold fringe has more to do with the numbers of stars on the flag than it has to being quote-unquote cosmetically pleasing, as is the typical reason given? What if the 13 stripes on the flag isn't representing the 13 original colonies, but something entirely different? What if we pledged the allegiance to the flag in school and otherwise for completely different reasons than we're told? What if our country's flag is not what we are told it is? What if there's a completely different reason the national anthem is sang before sporting events? What if sporting events' main purpose is to be a distraction for something else? And I'm not talking about just being an outlet for your own life for a few hours. I'm talking about the big picture. What if the Christian cross isn't what it seems, but quite the contrary? What if it has very little to do with the Son of Man, but we are led to believe it does for nefarious reasons? What if everyone wearing a cross around their neck, or have it tattooed on their person, or even a tattoo of Jesus, is really demonstrating extreme mind control and has no clue? What if Yahuah is vehemently opposed to Christians focusing on his crucifixion instead of his resurrection? So he doesn't like that the cross is being commercialized as a symbol of the church or otherwise. What if I told you more Satanists wear the cross than Christians, and Christians unknowingly wear it for the same reason through mind control? And that Yahuah sees it as celebrating death, which is what Satanists do, and he sees it as a curse. What if there's a specific reason priests and pedophilia seems to be synonymous? What if there's a specific reason we're learning how many pedophiles seem to be in Hollywood? And it's the same reason priests are, tying back to what really transpired in Eden. What if our children are being kidnapped off the streets for a specific reason, and there's one group behind most of them, including abductions in other countries, especially third world countries, and it's all related to what really happened in Eden? What if alien abductions are essentially no different than kidnappings that take place all over the world, and the same group of people are behind it? What if the military isn't used how we think it is, nor how soldiers think it is? What if America isn't the good guy, but rather the big bad bully of the world, and they deceive the military into doing their dirty work through false flags? What if the human body doesn't actually need anywhere near 8 hours of sleep at night, but doctors were told that in medical school for another reason, and most people feel exhausted when not getting that much because they've trained their body to follow what they've been told through generational indoctrination? What if a full-time workday is set as the exact same length as required sleep because it takes up 2/3 of each weekday? not including round-trip commutes. And it's all to keep the masses from having any real time to figure out what's really going on in the world. After all, everyone lives for the weekend, right? In order to blow off steam and recover from the arduous work week. So the last thing they want to do is more work. It's playtime, right? Before you know it, years go by, and no one's the wiser. What if I told you being charged federal taxes on fiat money, which is printed out of thin air without any precious metals backing it, is comparable to someone who is illegally shacking up in an empty foreclosure home, and during the lengthy process of the foreclosure being official, they greedily decide to charge rent to those who want to stay there too? That we are basically agreeing to use their worthless money system by admitting we are citizens via forms like voting ballots, so we are tricked into voluntarily paying taxes, thinking we actually have freedom when we're really paying for it through the nose. What if enlisting in the military was not much different than giving your friend a ride to the store, and while you wait in the car distracted by your smartphone, he actually goes across the street and robs the bank? Unbeknownst to you, you're clueless to the fact that you're actually the getaway driver until being stopped at a roadblock with guns pointed at you. But the big difference with this analogy? The military doesn't do the dirty work, the enlisted soldier does. Only you don't realize the real reason you're doing it in the first place. Sounds like the flip version of don't ask, don't tell, doesn't it? What if the missing pieces to the puzzle started in the Garden of Eden, where Adam was first an angelic being with an angelic wife, who wasn't Eve? And the reason his first wife was not included in the Bible, or at least only glossed over in Genesis 1:27, is because of how big of a role she had in the history of the world, including this day and age's evil empire. What if Adam didn't father Cain, but Cain and Abel were actually twins by different fathers? What if partaking of the forbidden fruit was actually an allegory for sexual seduction, and Cain's father was actually Lucifer, and his bloodline has gone on throughout history to run the world through 13 original Illuminati bloodline families? And that's the real stacked deck monopoly controlling all positions of power in the world. And Trump's role in all this is to drain the swamp of this bloodline, because he's actually working for the next cabal to take over, the eighth and final regime, which is of the spiritual realm, the realm in which Adam's first wife rules over. Her name's Lilith. You may have heard of her, but told that she was fiction. What if I told you that just like Eve before her, Lilith was also seduced by Lucifer, and that she's actually mentioned in the Bible? Like I said, in Genesis 1:27, it says, Yah created man in his own image, in the image of Yah. He created him, male and female. He created them. Now, most people think that incident and the incident, if you go down to Genesis chapter 2, verse 5, where it talks about how Yah had not caused it to rain on earth and there was no man to till the ground. In verse 7 it says, Yah formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Shortly thereafter Yah caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, so he could remove a rib to create his wife, whom Adam would refer to as woman because she came from man. Now, like me, you probably assume that was the same incident and they just glossed over it in the early part of Genesis and they recapped it in Genesis 2:7. What if I told you the church doesn't talk about that being two different incidences because they don't want you to know the truth? What if I told you they say Lilith is fictitious because they don't want you to know the truth? Because that would blow the lid off everything and explain why the world is the way it is. the puppet Lucifer allowed to run the roost for the time being, all for Father's purpose. And unbeknownst to most people, Lilith has been having offsprings for thousands of years with Lucifer, King Solomon, and who knows who else. She wasn't cursed like Eve was. She was just exiled off the planet. And she was an angelic being, so she never died like Eve did. So all she's been doing this whole time is having offspring. What if I told you that's what aliens really are? Her offspring, in combination with fallen angels. What if, because the bride believes that the church's fathers elect or chosen through generational indoctrination, they are steadfastly set in their ways and refuse to budge on anything because good old Apostle Paul said they can't be deceived, despite what Yahuah said, which is typically the opposite of what Paul teaches. But since he wrote half the New Testament, guess who the church has grown to love all these years? Especially when most sermons are arguably carried out through his books. What if Paul has the bride so fooled because of what he has said regarding they can't be fooled? They refuse to believe he's the false Messiah that they unknowingly follow every sun god day. When it is brought to their attention, simply because he said it was not possible. What if the bride's ultimate downfall is that they think they cannot be deceived, not realizing or accepting that the guy who said that is the very one doing the deceiving? What if Christianity as a whole is the lukewarm church of Laodicea, described in Revelation chapter 3, verses 14 through 16? What if I'm using the words "what if" simply because I want you to really consider what I'm saying, possibly triggering you to do your own research, as opposed to just coming out by saying it's all true, where you would immediately dismiss it as fake news because it seems too implausible to be remotely true? What if?